Thank you so much for joining me today. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name's Dick Manasseri. I'm a proud father and grandfather, resident of Michigan, and co-founder of Sharia Crime Stoppers. Sharia Crime Stoppers is an organization that is trying to resurrect training for local law enforcement so they can do their job. Local law enforcement wants to do their job, but they've had no training in topics like Sharia, jihad, sedition, honor violence, pedophilia, etc., related to the Sharia community in Michigan. So one of our goals across the country is to resurrect the training, which was removed under the Obama administration, so local law enforcement can understand that some parts of Sharia are criminal.
When did you create Sharia Crime Stoppers?
I would say we're about 2 years into it, and we became concerned when we realized that women are property. It's that simple. Women are property if you practice Sharia. Well, if women are property, that would open up the door to activity which might be sanctioned under Sharia, but would in fact be criminal. An example might be polygamy, it might be child brides, it might actually be terrible things like female genital mutilation, and so on. Our position is that it's in an advanced state of Sharia saturation, and that's why it's important to understand implications for everyday living amongst people who have a different approach to right and wrong in terms of normal behavior, like things as terrible as rape. It's a different concept of something as fundamental as women are property, and therefore things like rape have there's a different approach to that. So we want people to understand it, and we're frankly concerned about crime that is misdiagnosed. The justice system works, but only if people understand and are trained in what Sharia sanctioned behavior is that is in fact criminal under the Constitution, but under state law as well.
At what point during your 10 years here in Michigan did you first realize or recognize signs of Sharia in your community?
I think the refugee resettlement program got our attention. Why was Michigan getting 12% of the Syrian refugees coming into Michigan? People paid attention to the whole notion of Syria as a destabilized country without records. So despite the fact that the State Department would tell us that they have a fantastic process to vet these refugees, the facts are that there's no data. There's no data when you have a country that's in disarray. So people were being brought into Michigan, 12% of a number. So in a given year, there might be 12,000 Syrian refugees. Well, that means we were getting 12% of that number into one state. Why was that? Well, of course, part of the reason is the previous generations of resettlement into Michigan established beachheads, so that people were being sent here because of the affinity with the Arab community. Unfortunately, we also know that 98%, and these are the kind of things we study, it's public information, 98% of the refugees from Syria are Muslims. They're Shia or Sunni Muslims, self-identified and stored in the database. So we started counting. We started looking at counties to see if counties were getting, let's say, an overload of refugees. And the answer is yes. The 3 counties in southeast Michigan have been getting a large quantity of Syrian refugees. That's just an example. Of course, there were other refugees. There were Christian refugees that came in waves earlier than that. But why were we getting an enormous proportion of the Muslim refugees into this area? And so we started studying that. We then discovered there are 140 mosques in Michigan. Well, then we did some research. What's a mosque? Historically, a mosque is a seat of government. And so historically, now we learned about Sharia. We learned, for example, that Sharia is certainly religious. Maybe 10, 15, 20% is religious, how to pray, when to fast. But 75, 80% of it is behavior, is political, and how to behave on a very detailed level. And some of the things in the behavior category that have nothing to do with religion are, in fact, not just things we're not comfortable with, they're actual crimes. And so that shocked us. So we did the math, 140 mosques. It's a different seat of government. And the other comment would be, we learned that each of these imams in every one of these 140 mosques is supreme. They are the judge, the jury, the teacher. And so the mosque itself, in fact, is a seat of government. We have 140 of them in Michigan. There's an overabundance of them. And therefore we realize people leave the mosque, they go home, they live with the door closed or in their community, they're living the things that are being taught to them. And that tells them how to approach women. So the whole topic really here is inequality of women. I have 3 daughters, I have 2 granddaughters, equal protection under the law. Women, but not if you're understanding Sharia. So there's a danger sign, and that got us into this conversation of learning and teaching people about Sharia.
Is Sharia law in Michigan?
Sharia law is in Michigan. We've had leaders of organizations like CARE say that it is, but we just take it at face value. Sharia is an intense collection of how to behave. If you get trained in Sharia, you know how to behave in all these different ways, including, again, that women are property. You are trained as a young child, as a male child, women are property. As a female child, women are property, multiple wives, etc. So who does that training? The imam. How many imams do we have in Michigan? We have 140 of them. They're in buildings. Each building costs $5 to $10 million. This is a serious commitment to maintain an ideology called Sharia. So we know that people leave the mosque after being trained by the imam. They go home and they practice Sharia.
Abdul El-Sayed, who's running to be the next governor of Michigan, he himself practices Sharia in his own personal life. But then he's running on a political campaign of socialist and Marxist values. How do you explain that conflict that exists?
I think the way to explain that is Sharia itself. Sharia encourages Taqiyya. Taqiyya is the act of lying. So as a young child, you were trained, in my family, lying was the first thing we were told is bad. Don't lie. As a little child, you're taught that. In a Sharia family, you are instructed by your father and the imam. Lying is acceptable if it promotes the movement of Sharia. In order to install Sharia in my community or my country or my state, I can lie. And I am rewarded for lying in the name of promotion of Islam and Sharia. So the answer to the question is Abdul, as a Sharia compliant person, is perfectly, in his own conscience, he's doing a good thing when he lies and says he's in favor of LGBT rights, when in fact Islam would not propose that. So he is in fact a good practicing Sharia person because he is practicing Sharia. He's lying to the people who are considering voting for him.
Are you concerned as a Michigan voter that if Abdul El-Sayed is elected as the governor of Michigan, that he will implement aspects of Sharia law in Michigan?
I think that's a very good bet, and here's an example. He wants to make Michigan a sanctuary state. Well, if you make Michigan the entire state a sanctuary state, you have completely broken with the U.S. Constitution, which of course says that immigration is a federal issue and that law enforcement needs to cooperate with federal officers in immigration. If you take that out, you are breaking with the Constitution, which says the Constitution is not really that important. The residents can pick and choose parts of the Constitution. So maybe maybe it's even more acceptable to introduce another constitution that's called Sharia. So you normalize Sharia by breaking your allegiance to the whole Constitution, and one way to do that is sanctuary state, which is his policy. The other observation is, you can just look at London. London is a city in a Western country that has changed dramatically. The 9 million people in London elected Sadiq Khan as their mayor. The 9 million people in Michigan could elect Abdul as their mayor. What has happened in London? London has had a massive increase of separation of people who are not friendly towards each other, no-go zones, and of course an increase in crime. We're focused on an increase in crime. You can just do the statistics. Look at the crime wave in Europe. So massive immigration, open borders, sanctuary. Germany is a sanctuary country. Sweden is a sanctuary country. Abdul wants to make us a sanctuary state. What happens when you inject people, particularly tribal-oriented people that have their own law system? You end up with a different environment. So Abdul is promoting a level of lawlessness that people who like law and order should be concerned about. So we're concerned about the personal safety of individual people, and as we've said, that would primarily be women and children who would be less safe under Abdul.
If Abdul El-Sayed is elected as governor of Michigan, should the people of Michigan fear for their safety?
If it's okay to have multiple wives, if it's okay to marry 11 and 12-year-old girls to older men, if it's okay to honor the family by taking, so for example, a 50-year-old girl runs away. Well, that happens all the time. Social services, the police bring her back and put her in her family. If that's a Sharia family, the repercussions are really bad. She will either commit suicide or be sent away in a forced marriage, or God forbid, she'll be the victim of an honor killing. That is the way Sharia people think. That's what people are being trained in Michigan, and that's why Abdul, in normalizing that behavior, making that a choice, you can ignore the Constitution, you can practice Sharia, can't we all just get along? Well, that's a very dangerous situation from women and girls who live across the street from people that are practicing Sharia.
To the men and women who work on the assembly line here in Michigan, to the housewives, to the women who are at home raising their children, to the white and blue collar workers in Michigan, why should or shouldn't they vote for Abdul El-Sayed for governor?
I think if they believe in law and order, they should be concerned. There's definitely a dismantling of law and order when you can't even come up with a common law. So when you introduce multiple laws like sanctuary state or potentially Sharia, you complicate life. If you look at the people who wake up every day and go in London and try to do their job and move around, they are seriously confined by the increase of no-go zones, by the increase of crime. There are acid attacks. There are things that we would never even think of, and that's a function of the dismantling of law and order. If law and order people cannot be trained to do their job, if they have to avoid the whole concepts of Sharia, we basically have a reduction in law and order. The bottom line is people are not as safe. Under Abdul, women and children will not be as safe as they are today. They will be incrementally exposed to crime. We think it's crime. Sharia folks do not think it's crime. The one-word answer, the one-phrase answer is women are property, and that will become increasingly acceptable under an Abdul regime.
If you could send one message to the voters of Michigan and one warning, one battle cry for help, what would that be?
I think people need to remember how important law and order are and make sure they do not vote for a candidate who would make law and order less practical, less implementable, who would make it like a lawless environment. And to me, that's a major challenge. So if you believe in law and order, if you're a family person and you're concerned about your children, you have to be very, very careful about inviting a person who has a total different mindset on what's right and what's wrong, and who associates themselves with people who are, we use the word Antifa. Lawlessness is coming our way unless we reestablish the rule of law by voting for people who support that. And Abdul clearly, in my opinion, would be a step backward for women and children relative to their own safety.